What's going on, everybody? It's McFly here. Welcome to my channel. So today I wanted to show you guys my settings for Modern Warfare 2 and talk about the in-game settings, visual graphic settings, and talk about the NVIDIA settings. So let's first get into the in-game settings here. So you're gonna have different options for different graphics cards. I have the simple 1080 graphics card. Mine's really old. But what that means is anything I set here, you're going to have a little bit more options and it still will look really, really good on a new graphics card, right? So if I go in here and I go into the settings menu and I go into graphics, your display should always be full screen. You can turn on dynamic resolution, but I would suggest not having that on as it changes your frame rate. Frame rate, so I turn that off. I turn off VSync all the way through, and then everything else here, turn focus mode off, constrain mouse to gain window off, and high dynamic range I have set on automatic. If you have an HDR monitor, you can put this on automatic. I've found that HDR is a little bit dark, but with the NVIDIA filters, that will kind of deflect that away. So HDR looks very good once you set the NVIDIA filters, which we'll talk about in a second. So over to the quality tab, mine is set to custom because I made some changes, but I would actually reset this to recommended. And then once you do that, it will ask you, do you want to set it to quality or do you want to set it to performance? Always set to performance. Whenever you're playing competitive games, you never want to impact performance for quality. And if you ever listen to Shroud, he kind of agrees, always set everything to low or as low as possible because you'll have better frame rate, better reaction time. I do that and then I go in and I change some things to my needs that I think looks a little bit better. I changed, this was set to very low. I changed that to normal. You can see how much it boosts the RAM usage when you go from normal to low. So it uses a little bit more, but I set that to normal because then the textures look a little bit weird. Everything else I'll leave default. Distance level of detail I put to high just because it's harder to see enemies further away if you have this on low. So I did set that up to high. Terrain memory, I believe this is set to default on max when you put to low, but we'll leave it there. Physics quality set to high. Shadow map resolution I changed to normal. The screen space shadows, the spot shadow quality, and the spot cache were all set to low, and I changed all of those to high as well. I feel that this makes it to where all of the, you know, the detail level of shadows and things like that are a little bit better. You don't get darker areas and lighter areas that look a little bit off when you have these set to high as opposed to low. And it looks just a little bit better when you set those there. Particle lighting I set to normal. It was originally set to low. So those are the ones that I changed. I set screen space reflections to normal. And then last part of this is the NVIDIA Reflex low latency I put to on plus boost. The boost gives it a little bit less of an effect on your CPU. It uses your GPU usage a little bit higher. That way your CPU is not used. So if you have a powerful GPU, this is perfect. I don't, but I still set it on plus boost because I don't want my CPU to be overloaded. And then all of these depth of field, world motion blur, and weapon motion blur always should be set to off. It just looks bad. Always looks bad. Film grain always put down to 0. You might find that you might like it in the default 0.25 range just because it looks a little bit better. I prefer it to be off. I think it looks a little bit weird having random pixels floating in the airspace. So I do that. And then view, I have my field of view set to 100. Those of you who are on console or who have used console before know that it's normally set to 80, just in case you want to see the difference here. You can see on the left side here, I see just the edge of the garage and a little control panel on the left here. If I change it to 120, you can now see how much more space I can see. So always suggest putting it to the highest. The only issue you're going to run into with it being extremely high is further distance enemies are going to be very, very small, and it's going to be harder, a little bit harder to aim, but if you have a pretty good aim, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. And then I set my 80th field of view to affected. If you do independent, it's going to go back to the 80 frame or 80 field of view when you aim. Affected, you have a broader view of the whole map when you're aiming, and it doesn't look as weird when you're aiming. All of this is fine to set to default. I put the third person field of view in case I do ever play the third person to the highest. Everything else I left default here. So those are the settings you're gonna want to set in-game settings. Let's talk about the NVIDIA filters. So you can see here, very, very vibrant, very cool, still runs pretty smooth. If I were to go in here, Alt-Z will open up your GeForce experience, and then you can go to your game filter. And just to see what it looks like without the NVIDIA filters, very cloudy. It's not very bright. Everything kind of looks a little bit gray. Almost looks like you just woke up in the morning and it's very cloudy vision. That's how I like to describe it. If you go to the game filter here are the settings that you're going to want in this order: details, brightness, and contrast, and then color. For the details, I would recommend you having sharpen here at 65, clarity at 50 or 51, HDR toning, which has to do a lot with the darks and whites due to HDR. I would put that right around 25%. It makes it a little bit brighter for HDR, which is worth it. And then the bloom, I would set to 0. The brightness and contrast, or the exposure, set to 10%. Again, this is going to do with the brightness of your overall game. I would leave the exposure right on 10%. Again, it helps a little bit with the brightness. Contrast at 25%, 26%, 1% is not going to make huge of a difference. The highlights and shadows are pretty straightforward. Your highlights are going to be more of your whites and your brighter colors. Although these other two have been set to be brighter, the highlights can make the whites stand out a lot. So I actually prefer to have this at around -10, just to tone down the whites a little bit, because with your brightening of the contrast and the exposure, the whites are already popping a lot. And to have the highlights up or even at 0, it makes it a little bit too bright, a little bit too much white. So I like to push that down a little bit. And then because we're brightening up, I put the shadows at 50% just to make them a little bit darker and more realistic. The gamma here, you can change how you see fit. Again, this is going to change the darkness and the lightness depending on how high. I left mine at 0 because I think it looks really clear. Let's go to color. So the tint color and the tint intensity I turn all the way down. We don't want to mess with the tint. The natural tint of Modern Warfare 2 is actually pretty decent, so I leave that alone. Temperature here, you want it at 0. Mine won't let me set it to 0. It'll let me set to 0.5, which is essentially the same thing. Vibrance here. This is going to depend on what you like to look at. I've seen a lot of people that set it up to 100. We'll set it to 20. We'll set it to 50, 65. Obviously, vibrance is pretty much what it sounds like. You're going to have how much the color pops, right? I think having it at 100 makes it almost too saturated, makes it look like a little bit too fake, or almost like Borderlands type of thing. So I prefer right around the 55, 65 area. 60 is good. You can boost it to 75 if you'd like, if you think that looks good. But yeah, I prefer in the 60 to 65 range. That's where I'm going to keep it. And that's pretty much how I set my NVIDIA filters. You have here image sharpening. I wouldn't touch that. There are also some things you can set on your PC, but I know a lot of people don't like to mess with that because they play other games as well. So I won't go into that. That might be a separate video, but these are what I would set your NVIDIA filters to. And again, here is the difference you will see in the view. So here's without NVIDIA filters, and you can see it doesn't look all that great compared to the other look. Again, it looks a lot better than most of the default view for the other games. But when I turn NVIDIA filters on, you can see much more vibrant. You can kind of see all around you. You can see in the darker areas, and the sunlight looks good, and all that looks good. So I think it looks much better. All right, guys. So that is my video on your graphics settings and NVIDIA filter settings for Modern Warfare 2 as it is currently right now, with more levels and some, UI tweaks and display tweaks that they will add throughout the game. I'm sure this will change a little bit, but for the most part, I think this is the best graphics setting so far to get quality along with performance. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. And make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell for more Modern Warfare 2 content. I am ramping up the content for Modern Warfare 2 for things like this that helps a lot of the players. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for the support, and please do remember that good vibes are contagious.